Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. In 1984, a landmark decision was made at the Supreme Court involving the NCAA, that all things considered might have been the most important Supreme Court decision in college football history. Because in 1984, the Supreme Court held that the NCAA could not restrict schools and conferences from negotiating their own television deals. And once this ruling was made, the floodgates began to open up, as the number of live games on television began to skyrocket. Before this ruling, you saw one college football game on national TV per week. That was it. After this ruling, it was though every channel was televising the sport on Saturdays, and every conference was getting in on the action, including the Ivy League, the most prestigious conference in the country from an academic standpoint. One day after the Supreme Court made their ruling, the Ivy League signed a contract with Eastern Educational Network to televise games, which was a collection of 48 PBS stations across the northeastern part of the United States. However, by 1988, they were on to a brand new TV deal, having signed a deal with none other than the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN. And let's just say that the relationship between the Ivy League and ESPN was a bit rocky. Very rocky. Because in late 1989, after some disputes between the two sides about exposure, ESPN gave the Ivy League a chance for big-time television exposure. And the end result was a disaster that left the two sides on incredibly shaky grounds heading into the 1990s, torpedoing their relationship at the time. This is the story behind the drama between ESPN and the Ivy League and their desire for more television exposure. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what ESPN proposed to the Ivy League, we need some context to understand the struggles that the Ivy League was going through with regards to their deal with the network. As part of the initial 3-year deal signed in the summer of 1988 between ESPN and the Ivy League, ESPN would get to show approximately 6 games per year and 19 games total. Why it was 19 games instead of 18, I have no idea. And this was big, because outside of the occasional one-off game, the Ivy League did not get national exposure at all. Remember, that first TV deal that the league signed in 1984 was regional, so if you were in a state further south than New Jersey or further west than Pennsylvania, you were not able to watch any games. This was the first real opportunity for the Ivy League to showcase itself on a national stage, as on a fair number of Saturdays throughout the season at 12:30 Eastern, when you turned on ESPN, you got to see some of the best and brightest student athletes in the country squaring off against each other. So this deal went swimmingly, and everyone was happy, right? Well, not quite. If that was the case, then there would be no need for me to make this video. Because from the onset, the major problem that the Ivy League had with ESPN was that the deal did not provide them with enough exposure. And while there were a ton of issues, as the relationship between the two sides was not great, there were two in particular that stood out. The first one came during that inaugural season in 1988. On November 19th, over in Ithaca, you had Penn taking on Cornell in what was by far the biggest game of the season. Penn entered the game at 6-0 in conference play, and Cornell entered at 5-1. This was the regular season finale. The winner of this game wins the Ivy League. Seems like the perfect game to have televised, right? It's the championship game, and for fans who have been following Ivy League football all season, this is the perfect culmination of the season, as a winner-take-all game to end the year is a special occasion. Well, ESPN decided not to televise that game. Instead, they show the game between Harvard and Yale. Don't get me wrong, the Harvard-Yale rivalry is a big one, but whether it was worth showing on national television, since Yale entered this game with a record of 2-5-1, and Harvard entered with a record of 2-7, and whether it was worth showing over the conference title game, that's highly questionable to say the least. Keep in mind that as part of the deal, even though the Ivy League could request certain games be televised, ESPN got the final call. ESPN Communications Director Mike Soltis said on this controversial decision, "We realize the Cornell-Penn game is a big one, but Harvard-Yale has an appeal that reaches beyond the Ivy League. It's the kind of game that will reach beyond the real fan and will hopefully draw the casual viewer. I think even the people in Ithaca and Philadelphia understand why we're doing it this way." So ESPN made it clear with this move that they were valuing the tradition of the Ivy League more than the actual product on the field, and that they would have sacrificed showing an important game if it meant showing a game with more tradition and more of a rivalry. But if that was the case, then the issue that happened 1 year later in 1989 would not have happened. Because in 1989, despite ESPN having the rights to televise 6 games, the Brown Bears did not make a single television appearance. And this infuriated head coach John Rosenberg, who had no idea what the point of this TV deal was if it wasn't fair to all the members of the conference, and if not every team could be shown on TV. I should note before going any further that Brown went winless in 1988, going 0-9-1, and they were not projected to be a good team in 1989, as they finished the season with a 2-8 record. Still, ESPN already showed that they didn't care about the on-field product if it meant that the tradition of the Ivy League would be upheld, and it seemed like they were going against that here, especially since Princeton got 3 televised games. As Rosenberg said in a lengthy statement, "The most difficult task that I've had to perform in my 5+ years as a head football coach was stand in front of my players in our first fall meeting and tell them that they, and they alone amongst all Ivy League football players, have been excluded from the league's national television schedule on ESPN this fall, and that another team would be appearing 3 times. Our players here at Brown work just as hard and sacrifice just as much as other players. For them to be denied the opportunity to perform on national television while another group gets to do so 3 times is just not right. The league should ensure that there is a fair representation of all its members. If they allow this to happen, something is wrong. For the league's leadership to look the other way and allow so blatantly unfair a programming decision to take place contradicts the basic philosophy of Ivy athletics." So there was definitely tension between the Ivy League and ESPN brewing. The Ivy League wanted more exposure that ESPN was not giving them, and the return on investment from both sides was not great, because the ratings for a cable station back in the 1980s showing Division I AA football directly in competition with top 25 matchups on over-the-air stations like ABC and CBS were predictably terrible. Neither side was happy about any of this. And that's when ESPN hatched up an idea that in their minds was brilliant. It would have given the Ivy League the exposure that they had wanted for so long, and would have increased the ratings to bring the league to a national television audience. In the eyes of ESPN, this idea was going to save the Ivy League on television. And the reaction of the Ivy League to ESPN's idea? Well, you know when someone says that you should ask out your friend because the worst they can say is no, so you do it? And they say something that is infinitely worse than just a simple no? That's what this was. Holy cow. This was really bad. As the 1989 season was wrapping up, ESPN was already looking ahead to 1990, and was trying to figure out what games they wanted to televise. In particular, they loved televising games on Thursday nights, and it's not hard to see why. You had practically no competition from any other network from a sports perspective. All of the over-the-air stations were showing sitcoms and dramas and TV series, so you didn't have to worry about losing ratings to other games. In other words, if you like football above all else, as a good part of the country did, you were tuning into ESPN on Thursday nights. ABC already showed with their experiment of playing Monday Night Football games on Thursday nights every now and then that there was an appetite for football on Thursday, and that it was a viable business model, since 2 days without football on Tuesday and Wednesday was enough to bring people's appetites back. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And this was before Thursday Night Football in the NFL was a thing on a weekly basis. In other words, you had no competition and a built-in audience. So ESPN had an idea. What if we took one of the games as part of the deal and move it to a Thursday night? What if we take a game set for Saturday, September 15th, and move it to Thursday, September 13th instead? You get to be seen on national television, you get more eyeballs on you since you're the top ticket in town, and a lot of the exposure issues you've been complaining about are quelled to an extent. Yes, this has been a bit of a rocky relationship so far, but this feels like a win-win for everyone involved, right? Well, ESPN went to the Ivy League to propose this idea to them. And what did the Ivy League say? Not only did they reject it, but they angrily rejected the idea, wondering how ESPN ever even had the audacity to propose such a thing. Because when Lauren Matthews, the senior vice president of programming for ESPN, spoke to the press and took the matter publicly, it got ugly. ESPN was so baffled, perplexed, and angry at the Ivy League's reaction that instead of just keeping this behind closed doors and continuing to work, or saying that they proposed an idea that got rejected, Matthews put out a statement where he essentially said that the Ivy League made him and his company look like the Antichrist. Somehow, I am not exaggerating when I say that. As Matthews said, they soundly rejected it. It was like I was against motherhood and Christianity. I thought it was great. We would take one of the games on Thursday. They would get primetime exposure, which is 2 or 3 times what they would get on a Saturday afternoon. The way they made it sound, I thought I committed heresy. Other than that, I'm assuming the meeting between the two sides went really well. The Ivy League wanted more exposure. ESPN gave them a chance for more exposure. And the Ivy League responded by saying, "No, not like that, you idiots. How dare you propose this? Your company is the spawn of Satan. If I showed you the phrase motherhood and Christianity with no context whatsoever, I guarantee you that I could give you 10,000 guesses as to the context of that line and what the article in question was about. And you wouldn't even come close to guessing that it was a line describing the tumultuous relationship between ESPN and the Ivy League. It was that bad." So that raises the obvious question. Why did the Ivy League reject this offer? Well, as you probably guessed, first and foremost, the Ivy League was all about academics. They didn't really care too much about the money from athletic endeavors, because that was never the point of the Ivy schools in the first place. You can get a sense of that by listening to how Barry Frank, the television representative for the Ivy League back in the mid-80s, spoke after signing the first TV deal. As Frank said, "Nobody expects to get rich or cut tuitions on this." The Ivy League didn't really have an expectation of money. So while the exposure and potential for increased money was nice, it was secondary in nature to the academic nature of the conference. And when you play a game on a Thursday night, guess what that means? It means that you've got student athletes who will be forced to miss class. If they're the road team, they can't go to class on Thursday because they're going to be traveling. And when they arrive to class on Friday, after a long day featuring a game and round-trip travel, they're not going to be in the right state of mind. And the Ivy League wanted nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, to do with a business model that forced its student athletes to miss class, even if it meant more money and exposure. When you're in the Ivy League, you're a student first and foremost. So much so that the Ivy League was the only conference where, in the 80s, schools couldn't even conduct spring practice. If you want to learn more about that, there's a fascinating article from the Harvard Crimson from 1961 on why that was the case that I will leave a link to in the description. Heck, at the time of this, freshmen couldn't even play varsity football because they wanted to make sure that they were adjusted to life on campus for a full year first. So even though ESPN loved the idea, because it would have forced one team to miss a day of class, it was a complete non-starter, and never even got off the ground. The Ivy League wanted exposure, but not like that. And it's no surprise that after the deal expired in 1990, that the bridge was burned, and the relationship was beyond repair. In 1991, the Ivy League did not renew its contract with ESPN, as instead, they opted to show a select number of games on pay-per-view television, which was really starting to take off around the early 90s. ESPN was frustrated at the Ivy League was frustrated at ESPN, and it just wasn't a good relationship all the way around, with this proposal of moving a game to Thursday night being the straw that officially broke the camel's back. Because the message throughout all of this was simple. Even if the Ivy League was upset about not getting enough exposure from ESPN, at no point could this exposure come at the expense of their academics. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.